Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I'm with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you Chapters 6, 7, and 8 of A to Z Mysteries, The Zombie Zone. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 6. Dink woke up when he heard someone singing outside the tent. He peeked out and saw Jack opening the coolers. Sunlight slanted across the water, turning the Gulf to gold. A sweet-smelling breeze came with the sun. It was a perfect morning, and Dink was hungry. As Dink pulled on his sneakers, he thought of last night. He laughed. No way could that have been Jack in the grave. No way! Dink nudged Josh and Ruth Rose awake, then unzipped the flap and left the tent. Jack was wearing shorts and a t-shirt again. Hey! He said, smiling at Dink. I brought fruit and bagels and juice. You hungry? Yeah, my stomach is rumbling, Dink said. Mine is too, Josh said, joining them. Ruth Rose came next, fixing her headband. Jack carried the food down to one of the flat-bottom boats to use it as a tabletop. They looked out over the water as they ate. Look, Jack said, pointing along the shore. A mother squirrel and two young ones were sitting at the water's edge. They washed their hands and faces, then waddled back into the trees. When are we going to see the alligator nest? Josh asked. Jack checked his watch. Pretty soon, but I want to check in on Myrna first. Do you mind? He asked. She seemed worried yesterday. Sure, Dink said. But what will we do with the tent and stuff? I'll get it later, Jack said. Are you going to tell Myrna what we saw last night? Asked Ruth Rose. Jack chewed his lower lip for a few seconds. If I'm right and it was one of the village men, she'd already know about it, he said. But I'll definitely mention it to her. The kids helped Jack tidy up, then they hiked toward the small village. Myrna was there weeding her garden. Myrna looked up at Jack. Everyone's at the graveyard, she said. I came to see how you're doing, Jack told her. Myrna sat on the edge of her porch. She stretched her back and wiped dirt from her hands. My friend Bo wants to leave here. One of the robbed graves is his father's. She glanced up at Jack. I'm worried, too. Just then, Jack's cell phone rang. He answered, listened, then said, Okay, hun, see you in a few minutes. Is the baby coming? Asked Dink. I don't know, but my wife said she feels funny, Jack said. She wants to go see our doctor. Do you mind if I take you back to the hotel for a while? I'll pick you up later and we can check out that alligator nest. They can stay with me, Myrna offered. Go see your wife. The kids will be fine here until you get back. Is that okay with you guys? Jack asked. Sure, Ruth Rose said. But will you let my grandmother know? She keeps her cell phone with her while she's painting. Jack nodded. I'll call her from the van, he said. He took off jogging back toward the trail. See you in an hour, he called over his shoulder. I'd better finish this weeding, Myrna said. She hiked her dress up and got down on her knees in the garden. The bottoms of her feet were black from the rich soil. Myrna, did one of the men go out to guard the cemetery last night? Dink asked. The woman sat back. Why are you asking? Jack was going to ask you, but he forgot, Dink said. Myrna shook her head. I don't know. Listen, while I work on the garden, why don't you kids go out and explore, she said. What if we get lost? Josh asked. Then I'll come get you, Myrna said, reaching into a deep pocket and pulling out a whistle on a lanyard. My grandkids use this when they come to visit me, she said, dropping the lanyard around Josh's neck. Don't your grandchildren live here? Dink asked. Myrna shook her head. My son took his family and moved away, she said, gazing at her simple hut. Myrna yanked a weed from in between some clumps of lettuce. Go play for a while, she said. The kids left Myrna and walked to the edge of the clearing. I want to go back to the cemetery, Ruth Rose said. Yuck! Why? Josh asked. Aren't you curious? Ruth Rose asked. Or do you believe we saw a zombie last night? I don't know and I don't care, Josh said. That totally creeped me out. Oh, come on, Josh, Dink said. Now that it's daylight, we might find a clue to who was down in that grave. Okay, I'll go, but don't try to get me to climb down in it, Josh said. The kids found the path to the graveyard. When they got there, they saw dozens of village people on their knees near the two empty graves. Their heads were bowed and no one was saying a word. I think they're praying, Dink whispered. "Let's keep going." They moved quietly away, following the iron fence. They came to the beginning of another narrow path, opposite the one that led back to Myrna's hut. Josh peered down the path. He was holding on to Myrna's whistle with one hand. "What's down there?" he asked nervously. "That's what we're going to find out," Ruth Rose said. They walked single file. Ruth Rose led, and Josh hiked right behind her, which was why he nearly walked up on her heels when she suddenly stopped. "What?" Dink asked when he was standing next to Ruth Rose. Ruth Rose didn't say anything. She was pointing to the ground. Then Dink and Josh saw it too. Ruth Rose had spotted a large footprint in the moist red clay. "Oh my gosh!" Josh moaned. "Zombie feet!" Chapter 7. "Look, there's another one," Dink said, pointing ahead on the path. "And another." "I wonder who made them," Ruth Rose said. She knelt down and put her finger in one of the prints. "These are toe marks. Did you guys notice that guy in the grave was barefooted?" Dink shrugged. He put his own foot next to the print. "It's nearly twice as long as mine." "Let's follow them," Ruth Rose said. Josh nearly choked. "Are you crazy?" "Josh, don't you want to know whose feet these are?" Dink asked. "It could be the grave robber." "Come on," Ruth Rose said, taking the lead again. As they walked the trail, the soil changed from dark red to brown to almost black. They had no trouble finding more footprints in the soft earth. Suddenly, Josh stopped. He stuck his nose in the air like a wolf. "I smell food," he said. "What?" Dink asked. "Hot dogs?" Josh shook his head. "Something sort of spicy," he said. "Like chili." "Chili in the woods?" Dink asked. "Gee, maybe there's a restaurant out here in the middle of nowhere." The next one to stop suddenly was Ruth Rose. She put a finger to her lips. "Shh! Listen!" she hissed. A few seconds later, they all heard a thunk. Then there were more thunks. The kids stared at each other with raised eyebrows. Ruth Rose kept walking, and the others followed. The trail ended in a sunny clearing. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose stood and gaped. Straight ahead was a small cabin built from stuff you'd find in a junkyard. Old hunks of tin, mismatched boards, sheets of plastic, even the rusted hood of a car. The cabin was raised off the ground on thick tree stumps. A gigantic tree shaded the house. Dink noticed a tire swing hanging from one of the branches. He wondered if kids lived here. Standing with his back to them was a tall man holding an axe. His hair was so light it looked white. He wore long pants and a long-sleeved shirt. Below the pant bottoms, Dink could make out large bare feet. The man raised the axe over his head and brought it down on a log. When he bent to grab the two split pieces, he noticed the kids watching him. Dink was surprised. He had expected an older man, but the face staring at them was smooth. The man had warm brown eyes. He looked no older than Jack. "Hello," the man said. His voice was deep but gentle. "Are you lost?" Dink spoke up. "No, we're exploring," he said. "Are you hungry?" the tall man asked. Behind the stack of firewood, a fire was burning in a pit. A black iron pot was suspended over the flames, and the smell of something spicy filled the air. "We just had breakfast," Ruth Rose said. "But thank you anyway, mister." "My name is Byron," the man said. "I'm Ruth Rose, and these are my friends Dink and Josh," Ruth Rose said. Dink saw an easel set up under a tree. "Can we look at your painting?" he asked. "Okay," Byron said, blushing. The three kids walked over to the easel. Byron had painted an old iron fence. Hanging over the fence was a tree branch dripping gray Spanish moss. The moon shone down, bathing the scene with a soft glow. The space behind the fence was blank. "It's not finished yet," Byron said from behind Dink, startling him. How could such a big guy walk so silently? Dink wondered. Chapter 8. "Your picture is excellent," Ruth Rose said. "My grandmother likes to paint too." Byron smiled and blushed. He walked toward his little garden. "Do you like strawberries?" "Sure," Josh said, and the kids followed Byron. The garden was neatly laid out in rows. A shovel and hoe stood leaning against a small tree. There were tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, and some things Dink didn't recognize. One corner of the garden was filled with strawberry plants. Byron told Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose to help themselves. The kids waded into the patch carefully as they picked the bright red berries. Suddenly they heard a whoosh, and a large owl flew out of the trees. The bird landed on Byron's wrist and plucked a strawberry from his hand. "This is Bill," the man said. "He's awesome," Josh said. Byron stretched his arm toward Josh. "You can pet him," he said proudly. While Josh was petting Bill, Ruth Rose poked Dink on the arm. When he looked at her, she nodded toward the shovel a few feet away. The edges of the shovel blade were caked with red clay. Byron carried Bill over to the soup pot. The kids watched him scoop out something and feed it to the owl. "That red dirt looks the same as the dirt at the graveyard," Ruth Rose whispered. "So what?" Josh said, plucking another berry from the patch. "Josh, that could mean Byron was digging in the cemetery," she said, keeping her voice low. "The soil here in his garden is black, not red." Josh's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes shut, then flew open again. "You mean that could have been him in the cemetery last night?" "Not so loud," Dink whispered. "Guys, I'm sure there's red clay in other places around here, not just in the cemetery. I saw the same color clay on the floor of Jack's van yesterday." Josh stole a look at Byron, who was still feeding Bill. "That guy we saw last night had light hair like Byron's," he whispered. "And look at his big feet. He could have made those footprints we saw near the cemetery." "None of that proves anything," Dink said. He remembered Jack in the moonlight last night. Jack's blonde hair had looked silvery, the same as the hair of the mystery man in the cemetery. "I have some other ideas," Dink added quietly. Just then Byron looked up and smiled at the kids. "Do you want to swing on my tire?" he asked. No, thank you," Ruth Rose said. "We have to be getting back." Byron tossed Bill into the air and the bird disappeared in the trees. Then Byron walked toward the kids and stretched out a huge hand. "It was very nice meeting you," he said. Dink shook Byron's hand. Beneath the skin, Dink felt the man's strength. "It was nice meeting you too," Dink said. The kids walked toward the trail. When Byron and the cabin were out of sight, they began running. 5 minutes later, they stopped, panting in front of Myrna's little hut. Myrna was sitting on her porch talking with a woman dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. "Did you kids have fun?" Myrna asked. "Yes," Josh said. "We met a big guy named Byron and his owl." "He showed us his painting," Ruth Rose said. "He sure is a good artist." Myrna nodded. "Byron makes his own paints from nature," she said. "He gathers berries, digs up roots, anything he can find. He grinds the stuff up to create his different colors." Myrna introduced the woman to the kids. "Lucy is a friend of Jack's," she said. "She'll drive you back to your hotel." Lucy smiled at the kids. "Jack's at the hospital with his wife," she said. "Looks like today is the day for the baby to be born." They said goodbye to Myrna and followed Lucy to the trail. They had only gone a short distance when they saw a man approaching them. He was hurrying toward the village. When the man noticed Lucy and the kids, he stopped. His face was red and sweaty. "Am I on the right trail for the village?" he asked. The man was wearing a straw hat, dressy pants, and a striped shirt. His briefcase and shiny black shoes looked out of place in the forest. Even with the hat, Dink recognized the man. He had been sitting near them at the hotel restaurant yesterday. What was he doing in the woods? "Yes, about another 5 minutes straight ahead," Lucy said. Then she added, "Is anyone expecting you?" "Yes," the man said, then hurried on his way. "That's odd," Lucy said after the man left them. She chuckled. "If he's a salesman, he'll have a hard time selling anything." They kept walking. When they passed the zombie sign, Dink asked Lucy about it. "I have no idea what that means or who put it there," Lucy said. "Jack thought it might be a joke," Ruth Rose said. "Not very funny," Lucy said. "A lot of people who live near these parts believe in zombies." Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 9, 10, and 11. Goodbye.